today I was on social media and I was on my search page on Instagram, and there was like some cute girl. So I clicked on it because that's half my search page is pugs and half are cute women. Anyways, she was talking about how she said, I got robbed 10 years ago and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I'm going to tell you why. And then she tells a story about how she got robbed, her purse, phone, all that stuff. And she was supposed to go out of the country in a couple of days, but she had lost everything, her passport, money. So she didn't want to go back home because this guy that robbed her had her address because he took her whole purse. So he had her ID and everything. And she decided to go to her dad's place instead. And she spent the night at her dad's house. And she said the next morning, her dad comes into the room, kisses her on the forehead like he used to when she was a little child, and says, I love you. And she said a couple of days later, he passed away. And that was the last time that he said, I love you. And she was so grateful for that person that robbed her, because if she hadn't been robbed, she would have been in Bali or somewhere else. And she wouldn't have had the opportunity to spend that last time with him and to hear that one more time. And it just meant so much. And so that's kind of how I think about life. When bad things happen, I'm like, wait a minute, there's something positive that's going to come out of this, because I've written about it and I've paid more attention to those kinds of stories. And it's kind of locked in now to my system, which is kind of nice.
It's beautiful. And I so agree with you on that. In my trainings, in one of our works, we talk about every thought. While it's just an independent thought and doesn't really have a meaning, we give it a meaning, and so it becomes either a disempowered thought or an empowered thought. And a disempowered thought is take an event and think about the worst that could happen and let that become a thing that you remunerate on and it make it big and make it like the most cathartic thing that has happened to you. Or an empowered thought is something to the tune of, well, if this has happened, there must be a reason for it, or it is okay, and move on to the thing that actually helps you further down that line. But I know it's a skill to develop that. It's not something that you wake up and you say, you know what, I am going to always think a positive thing, especially when something that terrible happens to you, like you get robbed or something like that. Is there something that you have found to work for you or work for your students?
That's the thing, man. It's putting myself in that commitment to have to do it every day, to have to come up with something inspiring every day to share with people. And sharing it with people was a pivotal part of it, because that means it has to be presented in a way that's digestible, that's simple, and that is shareable for them to share it. And to do that, somebody said once, I think it was Winston Churchill or somebody said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time. Because it takes more time to go back and communicate with brevity than it does to just blurt it all out and be, verbose. And Gandhi said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. So it's like the combination of those things is what I've been practicing. It's not only just like finding inspiration, but then learning how to express it simply and in a way that is shareable for people. And that's been a really wonderful little skill set. So the foundation of my work is really inner work. Obviously, I've been teaching meditation for a long time, over 15 years. And as an extension of the meditation practices, you have gratitude practices, you have even stuff like no complaining practices, and also in the physical stuff like moving. I'm very clear about the fact that you can't just meditate your way to fulfillment. You have to actually exercise. You have to eat well, you have to be surrounded by loving people. It's just that all of those things are a lot easier when you're prioritizing the one or two really important key practices, like a meditation or like a gratitude or like a movement practice. So I would say it's the combination of all of those things. It's the writing that I've been doing. It's the moving. I've been exercising for a very long time. It's the meditation. It's the diet stuff. And through all of that, I'm able to really stay present to what I'm feeling in my heart and what I'm detecting in my intuition, and then taking action on that.
So one of the things that you said, which kind of stuck with me, is in 2016, you said, did I remember the year right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you said, I'm going to send an email every morning
Yep.
before 6 a.m. PST.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's a commitment to yourself, and then maybe you made that commitment public as well.
Yes.
Did you make it public as well?
I did.
So while I've, at least in my experience, I've heard a lot of people make commitments.
Mm-hmm.
And I have also experienced that despite their best intentions and effort and desire to fulfill the commitment, we can sometimes fulfill our commitment. Has that A, happened to you? B, if not, what have you learned about yourself that allows you to keep such, because it's 7 years, 365 days every single
That's
year.
2,500 emails.
2,500 emails is a lot of emails. It is a whole book. If you just printed those out, probably much thicker than this guy. And it's probably worth reading all 2,500 words or 2,500 emails there. So, A, did it happen? Did you have that moment where you're like, oh crap, I failed my commitment today? Or if it didn't happen, what do you think has kept you going to be able to stay with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't missed one since I started.
Fantastic.
But the experience that made the biggest difference, because I'm like everybody else, you know, I can talk myself out of doing things with very important sounding reasons. Oh, I'm sick. Oh, I'm this. I'm tired. Oh, I have so much going on my plate. And honestly, I talk myself, I have that conversation where I'm talking myself off the ledge regularly, like every couple of days. I'm like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm tapped out. I have nothing else to share. I've shared enough. I've done my part. How long can this go? You know, all that is happening in the back of my awareness at all times. And that's just become a part of it. You know, that's just, I feel like whatever you do, same thing with the gym, going to the gym. It's like, you know, do I really have time to go to the gym? Well, you know, how much can you lift? Does it ever end? Mm-hmm. And it's just always in the back of the mind. Same with in relationships. Like, I'm done with this. I can get somebody else, you know, I shouldn't be, she doesn't appreciate me. Mm-hmm. But you keep showing up, and the reward is in not giving yourself an out, but the reward is in overcoming that resistance. And the thing that made the difference was reading Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art, where you familiar with Stephen Pressfield? Yep. You familiar with the book?
I'm familiar with the book. I'm not familiar with Stephen Pressfield personally.
Yeah. So The War of Art is all about overcoming resistance. And he breaks it down super simply. He says, look, you're either an amateur, in which case you let yourself off the hook, or you're a professional. And professionals don't let themselves off the hook. And professionals face a lot of the same excuses and pushback that amateurs face, except the only difference is they go forward anyway. And when I read that book, which you can read like in a couple of hours, and just really took that framework in, it really made a difference. And I started thinking about that because he gives so many examples. In fact, he was one of the inspirations for how this book is laid out, because that book is just, each page is an individual story. They're not necessarily connected, although there's a through line in overcoming resistance in every conceivable type of situation. And so this one is the same thing. You can crack it open anywhere and start reading it, and there's a through line about spiritual minimalism. But yeah, that made a big difference. And fortunately, I had a friend who had just written a script. He's a Hollywood actor. He had just written a script. I bumped into him at Whole Foods in Venice, and we did the whole "what you're up to" conversation, because I had taught him how to meditate several years before. And I said, yeah, I'm trying to finish my book. It was my first book, which was a self-published book. And I've been working on it for like 2.5, 3 years at that point. And I was just so tired of thinking about it. And he said, dude, you got to get this book, The War of Art. It helped me. I was going through the same thing with my screenplay. And I read it in an afternoon, and then I was able to finish it. And so I got it that day, same thing, read it, and then I was able to just power through it, or at least put myself in a position to finish it. There's a whole other story related to that if you want to go into it, but I ended up finishing that book, and I just think about that ever since.
I like the story. I think however briefly I skimmed through your book, I think it's the $4,000 story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we'll talk about it in a hot second. But before that story, because it's an interesting story, and I think it has nuggets for our listeners for sure, because it talks about different kind of motivation. But say somebody sees themselves as an amateur, right? And I say that because while people who listen to our podcasts tend to be wildly successful in many other ways. They are individuals who are transitioning to a career of impact. Like they have usually made their money or are comfortable in life. They don't necessarily have to work.
Yeah.
Like they can, but they don't have to. Like they're not necessarily like, they're okay.
Their
They're
basic
okay
needs
in
are
life.
met.
They're okay in life. They live in comfortable places. They have comfortable incomes or have made money in the past, and so they can take care of themselves and their families. But there's a calling. There is a voice in their head that has told them all the time, I want to do something greater than myself. I don't want to just give to myself and my family, but I want to give to the world. And they have the qualities to do so, yet they see themselves as amateurs because this is something new they're doing. This is something that is, they don't know what to even do as the first step sometimes. And while it's easy for individuals like us who have done the journey and now we go, well, it's obvious what the first step is, to them, it's the world.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say, apart from, of course, picking up the book, The War of Art, what would you suggest the person that sees themselves as an amateur and wants to be that professional in the field as to how do we start to view ourselves, or what are some of the practices that you may recommend, whatever it may be that comes present to you?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we think is stopping us is discipline. We don't have the discipline, especially if you're comfortable and you don't need to do it. So there's a tendency to treat whatever it is the impact activity is like a hobby, and I'll do it when I have time, because that's how we treat hobbies. But it's not actually discipline that we're lacking, and I put myself in that category. It's honesty. It's honesty. So we can be disciplined to the extent that we can be honest with ourselves. And the honesty can start with, I'm probably not going to do it as often as I think I'm going to do it. So then maybe I need to put a stopgap in place, because I know that that's going to be the motivating difference for me, right? And so this actually ties into the extension of the self-published book story. So I had been dragging my feet, starting and stopping for 3.5 years with my book, The Inner Gym. And I just got tired of lying to myself. I got tired of telling myself, oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to wake up at 6 o'clock. I'm going to, stay up all night and finish it, in the next 3 weeks or whatever. And I said, okay, let me just put myself in a situation I can't get out of. And so I reached out to Drew Purohit, our friend.
Oh.
And because, Drew has done well for himself. And I knew Drew didn't need the money. You don't want to do this with somebody who needs the money. And I drew up a contract between myself and Drew saying that I am committing to finishing this book by such and such date, which was like 2 months from that conversation I was having with myself. And if I don't finish it at this date, if I don't have the manuscript completely ready to upload to the Kindle platform or whatever it was, you are obligated to take this check that I've written in your name for $4,000 and spend it on anything that has nothing to do with me. And at the time, this is 2014, $4,000 was a lot of money for me. I couldn't afford to lose that kind of money. And that's why I chose that amount, is because I needed an amount that was going to get my attention. If I had said $400, it wouldn't be ideal to lose $400, but I mean, it wasn't going to be the end of the world. But $4,000, I needed that to pay my rent. Mm-hmm. So I was honest enough with myself to say it has to be more than 400, more than 1,000, more than 2,000. And then I finally got to that number, 4,000. I was like, okay, that's scary. That's a scary number if I lose that money. And I gave it to Drew, and he signed the contract, and that was it. And then after that, all the time that I didn't have freed up, and I started working on it day and night. And I ended up finishing it like a week early, just in case anything unexpected happened health-wise, because I didn't want to take that chance. Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is not about discipline. It's just about being honest. So,
it is about being honest, absolutely.
So I would say to your listeners who are in that situation, get more honest with yourself and put yourself in a situation where you can't lose. You can't not do the thing you say you're going to do, because whatever you're going to lose is worse than whatever time you have to make to do the thing.
Absolutely. I want to add more further steps to what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing also is you you found what will get you to be more honest, in the sense of getting somebody else to hold you accountable.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
Not just you telling yourself, hey, I'll donate these $4,000 to something. You said, no, it's going to work better if I
I
tell
would
somebody.
come up with an excuse not to do it.
Yeah, it's like, oh, listen, I was sick, so of
or
course.
to do it in some way
yeah.
that makes me look good. You know?
Yeah, exactly. So I like that, because you also, I feel like you had a great understanding of self, where you said, okay, I know I will find an excuse if I did this with just myself.
Yep.
So I'm going to risk this big amount, which is as much as my rent for a month, to motivate myself to be doing this thing. Because there's a research that's done that most people in the world, I think about 86% of the people in the world, are externally accountable or externally motivated than internally motivated. I might be using the term wrong, but we don't do things for ourselves. About 14% of us can hold ourselves accountable, but 86% of us need somebody else to hold us accountable. My percentages are sometimes off, but
and
something to that
I never
tune,
had any contact with Drew that whole time. You know, I just had, that was what I needed to do for myself. And some people may hear that and they go, oh, that sounds very punitive. It's my goal that I set for myself. Drew didn't say, you have to finish this book. No, I set the timeline. So you have to set yourself a timeline. If you choose to perform this experiment, set yourself a timeline. You need a hard deadline so that you know that there's some completion to it. And it can be as long as you need it to be, right? But the thing is, getting to the finish line in any endeavor, in any realm of life, is going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. You're not going to want to do the things that it requires. And I've had enough life experience at this point to realize that. Whether you want to get into the best shape of your life, whether you want to clean up your diet, whether you want to, move or become a nomad or whatever it is, there's a part of that experience that's going to be very difficult to confront. And that's the point where we start talking ourselves out of it. And, James Dyson, the guy who invented the Dyson vacuum cleaner, he was on How I Built This podcast. It was a really wonderful interview. How I Built This is all about entrepreneurs and how they overcame obstacles to build their companies. And he tells this wonderful anecdote when the guy asks, do you credit your success with luck, or what do you credit it with, or hard work? He says, there's this experience I had when I was in track in high school, and I used to run cross country, and I noticed that I would get tired at the same point every time, but then I'd look around and everybody else was tired too. So I specifically trained myself at that point when I was the most tired to accelerate. So my race didn't even start until I got to that point where I got tired and wanted to give up. And he says, because everybody else also wanted to give up at that point, if you could train yourself to accelerate at that point, knowing it's coming, you'll win every time. And that's how he approached business.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So I'm hearing 3 pointers. First is honesty. Second is accountability, internal, external, whatever that might be. Third is training yourself to push yourself further, wherever that is, whatever that means for anyone and everyone. And lastly, would you say there is some role of maintaining a kind of an outcome or a motive to take action or a chase? Because I hear that you need to finish your book. Well, why did you need to finish your book?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you definitely need the why.
Yeah.
The why behind the whole thing. But I think if you're having that conversation for years and years, the why is kind of built into the process. That's why you're having the conversation. So yes, getting clear about that, getting clear about the impact that you can have. And I'll tell you another story that kind of goes further along. Let's say the book came out, and then maybe 4 years later, I go to Giusta in Venice to get some food after working out one day at Gold's Gym. And the guy who took my order, he goes, "You're like Watkins, right?" I was like, "Yeah." Because I'm reading your book, The Inner Gym, right now. And I was like, "Oh, really? Oh, what chapter are you on?" He told me what chapter he was on. And we had a little talk about it. And, it felt so great to be recognized and appreciated for something that was a big endeavor for myself. And on my way back home, I started thinking about all the resistance that I had when I was in the process of writing that book and not wanting to finish it and coming up with excuses. And I contrasted that with this conversation I just had with this person who got so much benefit from it. And I started to send the younger me a reminder to keep going and to not give up, and that the world is going to appreciate the things that you're putting into it now. And I think that when we're feeling the resistance, there's also a part of us that hears or feels encouragement, inspiration. You know, if we can get quiet enough to tap into that, or maybe it's the voice that tells us to start doing it in the first place. I think, and this is just my own opinion, right, based on my own experiences, I think that is a part of our future self having already accomplished the thing, reflecting back fondly on those days when we were experiencing the most resistance. And so I think it's all kind of happening at the same time, and we can tap into that. We can tap into that energy of having done the thing, and we can use that as motivation to keep moving forward, because it's just a little quiet reminder that what you're working on now, especially if it's something that feels aligned with your heart and it lights you up inside, I think that it's going to be a positive impact to the world. And if you can just stay trained on that, it can give you just a little bit extra motivation to keep going.
So tell me more about this this little reminder from future self.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an interesting thing to discover. It's an interesting exploration, and I'm hoping all of us experience something like that. How did that discovery? What's this intuition that's telling you? How would that experience be like for someone, or how's it been for you?
Well, I think it's just it could be just as plain as what happened to me in the cafe. You know, someone giving me appreciation, and then
now, how would it look like in the present moment that your future self is telling you stay on the path?
Yeah, when you there's usually two qualities of voices that we hear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, within those two qualities, there could be a myriad of dozens of voices.
Mm-hmm.
And so in one category, you have voices giving you reasons why you shouldn't do it. And then the other category, you may hear reasons why you should keep doing it. And the reason, the voices telling you why you shouldn't, they tend to have more certainty, more pragmatism attached to those reasons. Because you're running out of money, because you're too old, because nobody cares, because you're not smart enough, you know, the imposter
Mm-hmm.
syndrome, da-da-da-da. And the other one is more aspirational,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to, because this could become a bestseller, because, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and if you lock in on the aspirational voices, it can make you sound a bit delusional, a bit naive, a bit like you're gullible. That's why they say listening to your heart makes you gullible. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that listening to your heart actually makes you bold in action, because it makes you take a leap of faith in a direction where there is no guaranteed certainty. But you have a sense of fulfillment, you have a sense of expansion in the process of doing it. Like, it has to stretch you into a greater version of yourself in order to move in that direction. In the same way that when you go to the gym, like, nobody goes to the gym to be comfortable. You go to the gym to grow, to get stronger. And in order to do that, you need resistance. And the resistance is not going to feel great when you're doing it. But when you get that pump at the end of the workout, you feel like a freaking superhero.
Yeah.
And so you can get a spiritual pump by taking that leap of faith. And it could just be, I'm going to work on this book, or I'm going to work on my podcast, or I'm going to work on this script tonight, instead of sitting in my bed scrolling through Instagram for 2 hours or watching TV for 2 hours. I'm going to spend that 2 hours working on the thing. And you always feel better. You get that pump, that spiritual pump, after investing that time and meeting that resistance and doing the thing that you said you were going to do and showing up for yourself. So it's in those moments where, again, deep in the back of your mind, something is urging you to just do it. Work on your stuff. You've been saying you want to do it. Just do it. The world is going to be better if you do this. And I argue that's your future self.
And I think I wanna frame it in a way that as how I am hearing it is when you hear why it wouldn't work, it's your mind telling you why something doesn't work based on all the data it has.
Your ego.
So it's your ego, your mind telling you this is how it has always been, and this is the projection of it into the future, which is not so constructive just because it's based off the past. It has nothing to do with what is actually the possibility of the future, and the positive, affirmative, more aspirational voice that you hear is not the data of the past, it's the data, and that's it. It's the voice from your soul, which means it's the heart, it's the soul, it's the information that has not yet been presented, but it's the knowing. It is the known versus the knowing, if I have to frame it in a different ways. The known is your past, and so it'll always tell you limitations, whereas the knowing is something that is not yet been seen, so it'll always be delusional and aspirational and something that is to be discovered because it's not been discovered just yet. So I think that's how I am hearing it, and I think it makes so much sense to lean into rather difficult, like you said. The pump's going to be hard, the resistance is going to be hard, but rather uncomfortable but very meaningful.
And
in
you
the
do
long
get the
term.
pump. You get that pump in real time. Once
you do
finish doing the thing that you said you were going to do, even if it's just a small little thing. I call them a hop of faith. I get the leap of faith is too scary. Just take a hop. Just work on the thing for an hour. Just make a call. Just send an email. Just research something. You don't have to get your whole blog up and 18 posts. Just do one post.
It's also the I think brain chemistry wise, it gives you a dopamine hit every time you complete something, which is why often you don't want to complete little things. Like don't complete going on Instagram and searching for Light Watkins. Complete a bigger task than that, right? Or search for Ajit and like do a bigger task and then go search for Light Watkins or Ajit on Instagram, so you don't waste your dopamine. You're utilizing it for the greater good. You started writing Travel Light. Of course, it's something that led you to believe that we are in a path where we are taking everything spiritual. And you suggested from the title of the book, which is Travel Light, Spiritual Minimalism to Live a More Fulfilled Life. How did you come to this place where you said, I think maybe the world needs the message of minimizing the amount of spirituality that we are leaning into, or types that we are leaning into?
Well, having written 3 other books, in writing Daily Dose of Inspiration email, I started seeing my life experiences through the lens of storytelling, and particularly through books. In the same way that if I was a filmmaker, I would probably think, oh, this would be a great film. Or if I was a choreographer, oh, this would be a great, theme for a dance or ballet or something like that. So I started minimizing my life in 2018. I moved out of my 2-bedroom place in Venice, and I moved into a carry-on bag. And I started traveling around, probably circled the globe 3 times in the next few years before the pandemic. And I was sort of forced. I put myself again in a committed situation where I could only carry what I had in my bag, and I scaled down from a carry-on that I could put in the overhead compartment to a backpack, a day pack, because I realized I had too much stuff in the carry-on. And that may sound odd, like, what do you mean you have too much stuff in the carry-on? Because you're carrying things around with you. Everything you own, you're carrying around with you everywhere you go. So it's heavy. And people, there's this thing called the Pacific Crest Trail, which is it's a hiking trail from Mexico to Canada. It goes up through California, Oregon, and Washington. It takes 6 months to do it. And you walk an average of about 22 miles a day. And people who walk this trail, they'll start off with all their gear, and then a couple days in, they're shaving their toothbrush down in half because it's just, I don't need this extra weight of this extra toothbrush, because you're carrying everything with you on your back every day, those 22 miles. And it just gets a bit laborious. So I I started being more intentional about, okay, do I really need this? Do I really need this extra pair of shoes? Do I really need this extra sweater? And paring down. And then I learned how to hand wash my clothes, and that was a game changer. And so then it became this fun little experiment to see how little I could go with while giving keynotes, being on panels, dating, and doing all the normal things without looking like I was living out of a backpack. I didn't want to look like it. I wanted to look like, I was fashionable and all the things. So yeah. And then my book mind kicked in and said, oh, this would be a great book. I'm doing all these things. And there was a moment where, again, I was hand washing my clothes. I had also developed this sort of minimal workout routine, just calisthenics. So I was like, okay, how can I stack these habits? And I found myself one day in the shower with my clothes on, doing air squats.
Okay.
And I was like, people have to know about this. And counting the air squats with affirmations. So those are 4 different practices. Washing your clothes while you're taking a shower, while you're exercising, while you're praying, basically, affirmative praying.
Yeah.
And so that became, I didn't have the outline or anything, but that was the catalyst for sitting down and really thinking through the principles and how I can make this accessible for people in real life.
So that's minimalism, or were you optimizing for time?
Both. That was minimalism because I still was living out of a carry-on bag, but
no, but the whole practice of doing air squats while washing your clothes, while taking a shower,
all of it.
Yeah.
I'm just like, how can I? So the way I define minimalism is doing more with less.
Okay.
Doing more with less, and spiritual is informing it from the inside out, informing your action from the inside out. So, when I talk about it in the book, I'm very open about the fact that this is not about you being in the shower with your clothes on doing air squats while affirmative praying. Your version of that may be starting that blog you've been talking about, or it may be moving from New York to LA, or whatever's on your heart, and taking that leap of faith. And or if you don't have the courage to do that, just follow your curiosity. So that's one of the principles. And it's not about emulating my path. Everyone has their own path. And it could be starting a company with 500 employees and being responsible for, all those salaries. Anything that scares you, but you can't stop thinking about it, taking a step in that direction. And that's your path towards spiritual minimalism.
Beautiful. What does it mean to follow your curiosity?
So a lot of times I'll write about finding your purpose, and I'll get a flurry of emails. Oh, I don't know what my purpose is. I feel lost. I feel aimless, da-da-da-da. And I remember meeting this woman once who was asking me really good questions in our little casual interaction. And I said, oh, you'd be a great podcast host. Have you ever thought about doing a podcast? She goes, yeah, I think I'd be a good host too. I go, why don't you do one? Oh, I could never do a podcast. I said, why not? I only have 300 followers. So in her mind, she was incapable of becoming a podcast host because of her 300 followers. And she felt like she needed to have, thousands upon thousands of followers to be able to take that next leap of faith in the thing that she was already naturally curious about. And that's what we do. We'll talk ourselves out of doing the things that we're naturally curious about because we don't think we have what it takes. And so the spiritual minimalism framework is follow your curiosity. Just follow it shamelessly. Don't worry about how it's all going to come together. Who knows? No one can tell you how it's going to come together. Probably the resources that you're going to need aren't even going to reveal themselves to you until you take a few steps in that direction. Just go to one of the podcast host platforms, pay your little $20 a month, put your iPhone on the table, click record on the voice recorder, and just have a conversation and see what happens. I had a friend of mine who started a YouTube channel 7 years ago, and he was going back and forth in his mind. Oh, I don't have the equipment. I don't have this. I don't have that. And finally he said, you know what? I'm just going to get out my phone and I'm going to record myself and I'm going to upload it. And he did that. And he said after he posted his first video, a friend of his called him and said, hey man, I've got this $1,800 camera I'm not using. You take it. I heard you started a YouTube channel. So you take the camera and use it. And that's what he started using for his channel. Now he's got he's got 750,000 followers, subscribers on YouTube, and making a full-time living off of that. But he would not have started had he not just taken out his phone and just gotten that first scary step out of the way.
Yeah, Beautiful. Light. There could be hours we could talk about traveling light. What is it that if you were to just give us cliff notes or something as a reminder that you want to give to the audience or the listeners, what would that be?
So the book is broken down into 7 principles. First one is establish a contact with your inner voice, your inner guidance, through meditation ideally, because that's just the most efficient way to do it. Number 2, start making your most important decisions from your heart and not from your head. It doesn't mean make all your decisions from your heart, but the most important ones. Am I going to be with this person or that person? Am I going to live here or there? I'm going to work here or there? Your head is really great at figuring out the details. Okay, where do I need to order flowers from for the date? Where do I need to make reservations? Things like that. And then number 3, treat life like there are no throwaway moments. Number 4, give what you want to receive. Number 5, follow curiosity. Number 6, find comfort in discomfort, because when you're following your curiosity, you're going to get pushback from the world. So you have to be cool with that discomfort. And then number 7, eventually you will have to embrace the freedom of choicelessness, which is where you paint yourself into a corner, you commit to something that you are going to move in that direction and allow that to become the editor for everything else in your life.
Beautiful. Simple 7 steps, but profound wisdom that is between those pages. So highly recommended. Invite you to check out Travel Light. Thank you so much for listening in today. Thank you so much for coming down.
Thanks for having me, man.